Hello! Today and next week, we are going to talk about Moses. Moses is really one of the central figures in the Old Testament. He's the one who kind of bridges the gap between the patriarchs, who were the first people that heard about the covenant, and the actual people moving back to to the promised land. And he's the one who gets people to see that there's more to this covenant than just saying, oh, yes, I'm descended from these people, or yes, I believe in God. He doesn't do it, of course, by himself, but God reveals to him that there are certain rules and regulations. And of course, we all know what those are, and we'll come to those probably next week. This week, I more wanted to stress or describe maybe what Moses' younger life was like. At the time that Moses was born, the Israelites were actually slaves they were enemies at that point. They were enemies of the Egyptians. And if you remember when we finished with Joseph the last time, when he went to the promised land, everybody loved him. He was a Jewish person. He was, again, the Pharaoh, the king, took a hold of him and said, this is my guy. And because he was his guy, those brothers, the brothers who had abandoned him and left him for dead, sort of, the brothers also got to come to Egypt. And if you remember, they flourished in Egypt. And it's sort of the story of the Jewish people in the Old Testament, that they were taken over by different people, they were subjugated, and then, as they were freed in whatever way, they flourished. So what happened after Joseph was they did flourish. The Jewish people flourished. And the Egyptians, not wanting to have somebody flourish over them, not wanting people. At one point, somebody said, well, we don't want them hanging out here because if they do, they might become friends with our enemies and join our enemies. And so there was always a lot of conflict between the Israelites and the Egyptians. So at the time of Moses' birth, there was a new king. He didn't know anything about Joseph. He rose to power, and he said, see, the Israelite people have multiplied and become more numerous than we are. Scared. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them to stop their increase. Otherwise, in times of war, they may too join our enemies to fight against us and so leave the land. One of the things I didn't mention is, as we look at the story of Moses, there isn't just one story about him. And it isn't just in one book. It's basically Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, and you get the full picture if you read all of it. And you hear different stories in different books. And in some instances, it's the same story, but it's told differently. So it's kind of hard in just this short period of time to give you a whole view of Moses. Okay, so this new king decided that since there are so many of these Jewish people, he talked to the midwives, the women who helped people give birth. And when he talked to them, he said, well, now when you go in to birth the Jewish children, if you see that child is a boy, hurry up and kill him. They did not want Jewish boys because they felt, those were the people who would come in the military. Those are the people, who would own the land, who would flourish, that kind of thing. They had it wasn't a misogynist necessarily culture, but the firstborn boy was the one. And so the midwives thought about that, and they thought that was pretty immoral, thank God. And so they went to the Pharaoh and they said, well, or he came to them and he said, how come there's all these boys? And they said, well, the Jewish women are so strong that their babies come very fast, and we can hardly catch them. And so then he had to have another plan, kind of. So he just announced it to everybody. And the Israelites were forced around that time to become slaves. The other thing that they were forced to do was, again, he still wanted the firstborn killed. And so he put that out as an ultimatum. The firstborn boy in a Jewish family would be killed. So Moses gets born, and his mother really does not want to have him killed. And she thinks about it, and she decides, because what they were doing was they were drowning these firstborn in the Nile River. So she heard God's voice, and she said, I'm going to pack him up very safely in sort of like what we would see today as a picnic basket. But she put things around it so that the water wouldn't leak in. And then she got her daughter Miriam to go out and put Moses in the shrubs there near the Nile River. But Miriam was quite smart, because what she did was she put Moses in the river, in the side of the river, right when she knew when Pharaoh's daughter was going to take her bath. And so she came and she put her there, and sure enough, Pharaoh's daughter looks over and sees, here's a baby. And for some reason, she was very attracted to this baby, and she said, I think it's one of the Jewish babies, but let's see. Let's take care of him. So she took the baby in the basket, and at that time, Miriam came over to her and said, if that's a Jewish baby, you will need a Jewish mother to nurse it. And so Pharaoh's daughter said, yeah, you're right. I will. So what happened was, she said, well, if you can find that woman, take the baby to her and then bring him back when he's weaned, when he doesn't need his mother's milk anymore, or a woman's milk. So that's what Miriam did. And then one of the things to understand is that Moses was born around 1400 years before Christ. And so she brings him back. Miriam brings him back when he is weaned. And Pharaoh's daughter adopted him. So again, you have the Egyptian becoming fond of an Israelite. Now, what happened to Moses is he became part of the court. He was educated, very well educated by the Egyptian scholars. He found the favor of the Pharaoh. And then he just one day, at that point, the Jews were really now in slavery, and they were treated very, very poorly. And so at one point he was out walking, and he saw an Israelite being beaten by his Egyptian slave master. And it made Moses so angry that he killed the Egyptian. Now, Moses said that, well, let me read you what happens. Now, it came about in those days when Moses had grown up that he went out to his brethren and looked on their hard labors, really hard labors. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that, and when he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Now, notice, Moses wants to be sure he's not going to be caught, right? He doesn't ever want the Pharaoh to know that he killed an Egyptian. But later on, he realizes that some people had been sort of in the distance, and they had seen him. And they sort of confronted him with it in a subtle way. And so what he did was he flees to Midian, which is a place where there are a lot of Israelites. It's sort of an Israelite community. And he realized that if people knew he did what he did, he would be killed. And Pharaoh did try to kill him because Pharaoh did hear about it. So one of the things about Moses, we always think, oh, here's this big hero, and most of the heroes and saints have faults. None of us is perfect. And sure enough, here's Moses. He can't take responsibility for what he did. He doesn't want to admit it. And I can understand he probably didn't want to lose his life either. But so as he goes on his way to Midian, he stops at a well. That should remind you of somebody else. A couple other people who stopped at wells. So he stopped at a well and he helped the women who were there with the water, and he talked about the fact that he was an Israelite, that he had lived in Egypt, kind of told them his story. And so the women were all sisters, 7 sisters. And what they did was they went back and told their father about this guy they met at the well. And so the father said, well, bring him here. Let me see him. And Moses found a home. The man's name was Jethro. So Jethro actually became, first of all, Moses' Moses' mentor. And then he became Moses' father-in-law because he actually gave Moses one of his daughters. And his daughter and Moses stayed on the land for a while. And Moses became a shepherd, took care of the sheep. And one day, now remember, at this point, there's not a whole lot in the story where Moses talks about God or talks about the covenant. He's just kind of a guy, trying to make good in his life. So he's out shepherding, and all of a sudden he sees a burning bush. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet it was not consumed. Just picture that. The bush was burning, but nothing was leaving it. Nothing was really being burned. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight. Why the bush is not burned up? When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called him. Interesting, huh? God called him. And he called him from the midst of the bush. So when you think about that, there was God in the midst of the bush, and that's probably why the bush was not being consumed by the fire. And God said to him, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. And then he said, do not come near here. Remove your shoes, your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. And it was holy ground because God was there. He said also, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Now, in the beginning, I mentioned that Moses kind of starts to solidify the whole covenant idea. And so why did God have to say, I am the God of Isaac and Jacob and Abraham? Well, probably what happened with the Israelites was that the stories of Abraham and Jacob and Joseph and all those people were passed down to them. I mean, they kind of knew. They knew they were the chosen people. They knew there was going to be a lot of them. They knew they had a chosen land. But there was nothing like, like today we know about churches have congregations, churches have buildings, churches have pastors and pastoral staff. Well, it was not that way in the beginning. And so God wants to, have Moses think about this. And so Lord tells him something. He said, I am afflicted by my people in Egypt. It really hurts me to see my people being subjected to this slavery. And so Moses thinks, ooh, what's going on here? And so God said, I'd like you to help me. So Moses is not a happy, fast responder to God. Moses and God have a great relationship all throughout this, but it's always one of conflict in a way, or Moses not thinking he's worth doing some of these things. So Moses says, who am I? Who am I to do this? Look at me. I can't go back there and free the Israelites. I'm scared to go back there because Pharaoh will get a hold of me. And so God said, I will be with you. I will give you the strength. I will give you the power. That's what I will be with you means. So Moses thinks for a while. He said, well, they're not going to believe me. I mean, if I say I saw you in a burning bush, they are not going to believe me. And they will ask your name. Now, interesting, for us, we don't think about this too much, but at that time, the people who were not in that, who didn't feel that they were part of the chosen people, the other people, who we probably call pagans, they had gods, but their gods had names. It was the god of this or the god of that, or so it would be natural. And Moses knew this. They're going to ask your name. And so God said, tell them, my name is I am who am, which is actually where the title Yahweh comes from. I am who am. The Jewish people felt that you never could say God's name. They didn't say God like we did. Yahweh, they had lots of names for God, Adonai, lots of them, but not God. So then Moses says, well, what if they still won't believe me? I mean, that's not a good name. I am who am. And so God says, pick up your staff. You got that staff there? And he picks it up. He says, put your hand in your cloak. Take it out. And the staff turned into a snake. Well, what does that tell Moses? It says God is very powerful. This is a powerful thing. And then God said, okay, we're going to go walk down to the Nile River, and I want you to put that staff into the river. And when Moses put the staff into the river turned to blood. So Moses sees God's power. He knows God is sort of after him. And finally, he has a last plea. He says, please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither recently nor in times past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. The Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Or who makes him mute and deaf? Or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now then go, and I will be with you. I will be with your mouth. I will teach you what to say. But Moses still is nervous, and he says, please, Lord, now send the message by whomever you will, but not me. It's basically what he's trying to say. So then God gets mad. It says, the anger of the Lord burned against Moses. And the Lord said, Is there not your brother Aaron the Levite? I know that he speaks fluently. And moreover, behold, he is coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You are to speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I, even I, will be your mouth and his mouth. I will teach you what you are to do. Moreover, he shall speak for you to the people, and he will be as a mouth for you, and you will be as God to him. You shall take in your hands this staff, with which you shall perform the signs I showed you. So finally, Moses talks to Aaron, and they decide, well, maybe, we should do this. And so he goes to his father-in-law, Jethro, and he says, I have to go back to Egypt. I have something that God wants me to do. And so Jethro says, okay, I hate to lose my daughter and my grandchildren, but if you are called by God, you should go. And so Moses and Aaron assembled all the elders of the sons of Israel when they got back to Egypt. So they go back, they get back, and they find all the elders and all the Israelites, men, the males. And then Aaron spoke all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses. He performed the signs in the sight of the people, the staff going into a snake, the water turning to blood. So what happened? Well, you see that, and they believed. They said, we believe, and when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed low and worshipped. Moses and Aaron went to the Pharaoh, and they said, we want to take all of the Israelites, and we want to have a celebration for 3 days out in the woods, basically. And remember, these are the slaves. They're, running the economy, as it were, in Egypt. And, and what would happen, as we've found out recently, what happens if business is closed for 3 days? Nobody's there. So Pharaoh said, I don't think that's a good idea, no. Well, first he said, if they do. So Pharaoh listened to them, and he said, you know what? I don't know the Lord. You know the Lord. I don't know the Lord. So I'm not going to let them go. And then to punish the Jewish people, he decided not to give them, part of what they did was they made bricks. And so he decided, as a punishment, I am not giving them any straw to make the bricks with, which was, they had to go and find their own. And so God persists. God says, hey, wait a minute, you can't do that. And Moses says, you know what? The sons of Israel have not listened to me. So how will Pharaoh listen to me? For I am unskilled in speech. See, he keeps coming back to that. I'm unskilled in speech. So what they decide is, okay, and God, the whole purpose of Exodus really is to show God's power. That's why it was written. And it was written in such a way that it's why you don't get the whole story of Moses in it. It's the whole thing of God is very powerful, and God is more powerful than your gods. So why don't you take a chance and believe in him, basically? And so Pharaoh did a lot of things. At first, he told them that he wasn't going to give them straw for bricks, and that they had to go and find their own. And that took, but they had to make the same number of bricks that they made when the straw was provided. So that was just being abusive. It was being oppressive. So Pharaoh still's hard-hearted. This Pharaoh is a very hard-hearted person. And so God finally says to Abraham, you know what? I will prove to him that I have power, that I am the one God. And so Moses is like, I don't know if this is going to work. But what he did was God sent 10 plagues. And they went kind of like this. First, he had the plague of blood. And then the plague of frogs. Imagine having frogs all over the place. It was a plague. Sometimes we have plagues, when the cicadas come out, we think it's a plague because of the noise and because they're all over the place. But this was even worse than that. Now, what happened was the first two, with the blood and the water and the frogs, there were magicians at that time who were able to do the same thing that Moses and Aaron were doing. And so Pharaoh just said, you're just magicians. But the next plague was the plague of the gnats. And the gnats came and they surrounded the city and the town. They got on the people. They got in their homes. They got on the sidewalk, not sidewalks at that time, but the places where they walked. They were all over the place. People couldn't even see. Like if somebody stood 6 feet from you, you wouldn't be able to see them because of all the gnats that were there. Now the magicians could not match that. And so they're thinking, well, maybe Pharaoh will do something. So then comes the flies. And when the flies came, Pharaoh said, well, I'll tell you what. If you can get rid of these flies, I will let you go and worship in the wilderness. So Moses and Aaron believed them. And they got rid of the flies. And once the flies were gone, Pharaoh changed his mind. He said, I don't know. I'm not going to let them go. So the next plague was God sent a plague on the livestock. All the Egyptian livestock died. Not any of the Israelites' livestock died. Again, he said, okay, if you can do this, I promise you can go and you can celebrate out in the woods. You can have those days off and do it. So the livestock came back to life. They were cured. And Pharaoh changed his mind again. He said, I'm not going to do it. And then there were others, just horrible plagues. There were boils, there was hail, there was locusts, and then there was darkness. And darkness kind of moved Pharaoh a little bit. He said a little bit more about, well, maybe. But again, when it came down to it, once the darkness was over and light came, he wouldn't give in. So this is the end, God says, pretty much. I am going to show him my power, and in a little while you will be able to leave. You really will. And so what happens is, he says, I am going to kill the firstborn of every Egyptian. Not only the firstborn of their family, but also the firstborn of their livestock. And he says to Moses and Aaron, now you have the Israelites go out, kill an animal, one of your animals, get the blood from it, and mark your homes, so that when I pass over, I will know not to kill your firstborn. And so God has this plan in mind, and he also tells them, you're gonna have to go in a hurry. And so I want you to, and he listed the foods that he wanted them to eat because they were fast foods, not McDonald's, but you could prepare them fast and eat them fast. And so they did that. So Pharaoh's firstborn was killed, and that really finally got to him. His heart was softened. And he said to them, go, just go. I don't want you here anymore. Your God is powerful. And he even said, give me your blessing, which Moses and Aaron did give him their blessing. So God told the Israelites, he had told them ahead of time, get ready because you got to be ready to go. And what the Israelite women did too was they went and got the riches, the jewelries, and asked the Egyptian women for all of their nice things. And the Egyptian women did. All they wanted was, please get out of here before we have any more plagues. And so what happens? They go, they think Pharaoh's not going to chase them at all. It's going to be fine. They leave and they get to the sea, the Red Sea, and all of a sudden they see that the Egyptians are coming. We all know the story, but let me just read it to you. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may come back to the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the Egyptians, covered the chariots and the horsemen. Even the Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them, not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And so God saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And the Israelites saw the Egyptians dead. And when Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Now, one of the things that I just want to say about that word fear, it isn't they were scared of him. It's more the idea of awe, that it's that awe of how powerful this God is. It doesn't mean they were scared of him. Okay? Here's some questions to reflect on during the week. What events of your childhood shaped you or maybe changed you from the way you might have been? If you go back and you think about your life, is there something that happened that sort of put you on a different path? Or think about the ways that you have answered God's call. Most of us don't hear God in our ear, but we have a sense of what God wants of us. Have you ever really had that sense and answered the call and done what God wanted? And the last question is, God's action rescued the Israelites from slavery. So how have you experienced God acting in your life? How has God rescued you or saved you or provided for you? So think about those questions during the week, and we'll pick up on Moses' story next time.